Welcome everybody to Limited Level Ups. I'm Alex, and this week's episode is going to be covering Dominaria Sealed. Not Dominaria United, OG 2018 Dominaria. The next Arena Open, which is November 5th and 6th, so not this weekend if you're listening to this when this podcast comes out, but the weekend after, it's going to be Dominaria Sealed. Also, they're going to be putting up practice queues on Friday. So today's Wednesday. In 2 days, practice queues are going up. So if you want to try your hand, prep for the Arena Open, there's going to be practice sealed queues. So of course, in preparation for that, I want to get you all as acquainted or reacquainted, if you've played the set before, with the set as possible. Last week, I did a very similar thing, talking about Throne of Eldraine. People really like that. So we're going to try to cover a lot of the same ground. Mechanics, archetypes, top cards, with of course the twist that this is all going to be under the lens of Sealed, not Draft. It's kind of funny. Dominaria Sealed and Draft are not actually that much different. They're both kind of plotting in slow formats. Anyways, so we're going to be talking about all about that for folks that don't know about this set or, haven't played it before, and for the folks that maybe have drafted this set a lot before and haven't done about just Sealed. So why don't we hop into it? Oh, before we hop into it, I should mention the format for the Arena Open is a little bit different this time. So it's still day one. Sealed. You can enter as many times as you want. There's a weird twist on day 2 where you're going to be playing just like the previous Arena Opens. There's two, before we would have 2 drafts where it's like you have to go 3-0 or 1 loss and you're out. And then you do another draft and you have to go 3-0 or 1 loss and you're out. So you can't lose it all on day 2. But instead it is 2 sealed pools. And I think that's because there are no Dominaria best of 3 queues. So you can't just like enter with the general public like you did with, for any other Arena Open format that happened last little while. So it's going to be a lot of sealed. Like, straight up, just you're going to be opening a lot of sealed pools. 3 sealed pools if you go all the way. So, yeah, let's just get into what that means. Of course, before we do, just got to talk about the Patreon. Patreon.com/limitedlevelups. Just quickly, if you like what we're doing here, if you want to support the show, check that out. There's a lot of good reward tiers over there for those who choose to support. A lot of ways that we want to give back to you if you choose to give to us. So, yeah, if you feel like you learned something from the show, go check that out. Patreon.com/limitedlevelups. All right, so let's jump in. Before we get into specific cards, I want to talk about some general Dominaria principles to frame what the set is all about. So, Dominaria is a weird set compared to the sets we've had in the past few years. There are a lot of design elements that feel a bit antiquated, I would say, by today's standards. This set tries to tap into some nostalgia of early Magic, and it kind of does so by having cards that just kind of feel like they would be printed in 2001. That's the easiest way I can put it. If you were playing Magic back then, a lot of the concepts I'll be talking about today may feel familiar, and if you weren't playing back then you might have to adjust some of your priors that have been set in place by the past few years of Magic sets. A lot of things are going to be a little bit different. A lot of the feel of this format, I think, is actually kind of what you might get, or you might see as general principles for Sealed in general when you're, just like comparing Sealed and Draft. It's slower compared to your normal format. The removal is super important. Like in the Draft format, it was, the removal was super high picks. Card advantage is really, really important. I'm jumping the gun a little bit on this though. So let's just jump in to our rules of engagement. Okay, so first of all, this is kind of a funny one, and this is the one that I always think of when I think of Dominaria. There are a lot of bad cards. Like, truly, you go through the card file, and it's just like, oh, that card looks terrible. That one does too. Now, there are fair share of good cards for sure, and every set has bad cards, but Dominaria is definitely a standout. And I think especially, like at the time, I don't think really you felt it that much, but looking back, and for anybody who did flashback drafts, I'm sure you got to pack 3, you felt it, and you're like, wow, there's just nothing I want here. So for Sealed, this is good and bad, right? On one hand, it's easier to build your Sealed pool, right? There's just a bunch of cards you can set aside. You're just like, I'm just not touching these. On the other hand, there are some Sealed pools that are it's just really tough to get to 22 or 23 playables. So just cobbling together a deck might be difficult in some pools. Now, I don't think this is like I've done quite a bit of Dominaria Sealed in my time. I also did quite a few practice seals, just like draft sims or sealed sims before recording this episode. And I think the percentage of like truly unplayable or really awkward pools is still pretty low. It's just when you open your pool, I think it looks a lot worse than it actually is. Like a lot of times when you dig a little bit, you're like, okay, I can make something work. I can get to playables here. but you definitely are going to be putting a lot of cards to the side and be like, all right, that's bad, that's bad, that's bad. Like, usually when I build my sealed pool, I just drag all the cards I think are good, just, generically good cards into my main pool of things I'm going to build, or just, like, things I could consider for my deck, and usually that number is, like, 30, 40 cards, and I'm, like, not talking about colors, I'm just talking about, forget about what colors I'm playing, just all the cards that are good. And I think it's more like 20-ish, 25 when you're building your Dominaria sealed pool. So that is something you just have to adjust for. It's not going to, like, again, I don't think you're going to be opening your pool and being like, well, I got to resign this. Like, I don't think that's often going to happen, but some of the time it will. I think if you're looking through this set and it's your first time looking just like at the cards, it might be easy to just go, read the cards and go, okay, well, maybe this card looks bad, but maybe I'm underrating it, or maybe there's like a niche deck that you can play it in. Most of the time, I would say you're probably just right. Reading the card, it's if you have to read the card and it's not good, it's probably just not a good card. And just to give you some examples here, here are some heavy hitters. Okay, so we got Emeraneth Wall, which is a 4-mana uncommon. It's colorless here. All right, so for your 4 mana, you get an 0/6 defender. All right, let's see what you get. There's an ability. 2 mana, the wall gains indestructible until end of turn. Very unplayable, even in a defensive deck. This is not what you want. Okay, let's go to another card here. Healing Grace. Single white mana, instant. This one's a common. Prevent the next 3 damage that would be dealt by any target this turn of a source that you choose. You gain 3 life. So, like, a sort of really bad combat trick. Healing Salve, callback. Demonic Vigor, here's another, just, like, truly awful card. Single black mana, aura. Enchant creature, the enchanted creature gets +1/+1, and when it dies, you return it to your hand. So just like, this is the, like, I'm really scraping the bottom of the barrel here. I'm cherry picking some really bad ones, but the next level of card up is not that much better, and actually, you know what? I don't even know if I truly scraped the bottom of the barrel here. I know I'm filling the audience with optimism here for the next weekend, but there are some actual, like, straight unplayable cards because they're more aimed for constructed, like, Skurk Prospector is one, single red mana for a 1/1 goblin, sack it, add a red mana. Like, there's a lot of cards that were reprinted or callbacks that don't necessarily fill the file for limited purposes, but are just there, like I said, more for nostalgia, and it's like, oh, that's kind of a funny, cool card. So you have to wade your way through that as you're going through your sealed pool. Just be worried about that. All right, our next big picture point here is card advantage is king. So this is, again, kind of a callback to days of early Magic, and, some formats we've had recently where just raw card draw is pretty good. Even in Dominaria United, Phyrexian Espionage and cards that just draw you cards can be pretty good. In this format, in original Dominaria, it's so important. Games go long. I think this is one of the slowest formats on Arena based on 17 lands metrics. And hitting your land drops is really important because there are kicker cards in the set that are expensive. If you fall behind on mana, it can be a big deal. Finding your good cards is important. I just talked about how there are not a lot of good cards in your pool sometimes, and finding those cards in each game is quite important. So, stuff like Divination. Straight up Divination it is in the set. 2 and a blue, draw 2 cards. That's a fine card in this set. Soul Salvage. 2 and a black, sorcery, you return up to 2 target creatures from your graveyard to your hand. So, kind of a Urbor Repossession, but of course, you can't cast it for 1 mana. A worse card for sure, but kind of has that same vibe. Dark Bargain is another one that's pretty okay. 3 and a black for an instant. Look at the top 3 cards of your library. Put 2 of them to your hand, the rest into your graveyard. The bargain deals 2 damage to you. This is the kind of card that I'm going to want to play 2 to 3 copies of a lot of times in my decks. Again, just like hitting your land drops, outcarding your opponent. Like, outcarding your opponent is a very real plan in this set, where you're like a black grindy deck or a blue controlling deck where you just got like 3 divinations. So look to these cards. These are kind of like the filler okay cards in most sealed pools for most formats. They're actively good cards in this format. Next up, kind of related, like I just mentioned, games can go long and they can stall out. So your classic limited board stall that really doesn't often happen very much in formats these days because cards are just more pushed. Most of the cards are aggressively costed so that they do push you towards ending the game rather than prolonging it a lot of the time. There are not a ton of cards that are aggressively costed in this set, though. Or at least the ones that are aggressively costed are not the super cheap cards. They're more like 3, 4, or 5 drops. They're like, oh, okay, that's a pretty good card for that cost. And also there's a lot of ground creatures in the set, like a lot of 2/3s that tend to gum up the ground. So you can get in these board states that are just super, super large, and you need a way to push through. So evasion is important. Just anything with flying tends to be pretty good. I should say any like 2-power thing with flying. There's a bunch of like 1 mana or a few 1-power flyers that are cheap that are not so good. You want to have your flyers actually be a clock. And just in general, I think having a way to win or understanding how you're winning in this format is pretty important, or more important than it would be in another format where, you know, most of your cards can just win. Like a 5-mana 5/5 can get the job done a lot of the time. Not to say that it can't get the job done in this format, but the board does stall out a little more often, so just random big ground creature isn't going to get in very often. There's a lot of tokens in the set too. Sapperling tokens, soldier tokens, stuff on the ground gets chumped. So really prioritize flyers. You know, make sure like these are pulls into your into the color. For example, Pegasus Courser, 2 and a white, 1/3 flyer. When it attacks, you give another creature flying. One of the better white commons. Cloud Reader Sphinx. This is one of the best commons. 4 and a blue, 3/4 flyer. When it ETBs, you scry 2. So it's kind of both like a little bit of card selection and an evasive creature. I also would really shy away from playing just dorky 2-drop creatures. A lot of the cheap cards in the set are just bad, to put it bluntly, or, you know, just don't attack very well early. They're just not very efficient, really. And so one of the things I would say when you're building your sealed pool is, and this is good sealed advice in general, I think often people put too many dorky 2-drops in their deck. Don't worry too much about filling out your 2-drop slot. Like, yes, it's good to have good cards in your 2-drop slot, but for example, we've got a card like Bloodstone Goblin here. 1 red for a 2/2. Whenever you cast a spell, if that spell was kicked, the goblin gets +1/+1 and gains menace until end of turn. Okay, so it's like a bear that gets a little bit of a bonus if you kick a card, but ultimately, it's not a good draw on turn 7. And you really, because the games go long, you really want all of your cards to be good draws as the game go on. Yes, you do want some cheap stuff, but really limit the number of bad top decks you can have. Because it's a really easy trap you can fall into is just thinking, okay, well, I want to have a good curve. I want to make sure I have a lot of cheap things. And, you know, again, the sets as of late have really incentivized that. This set does not incentivize that very much. Now, there are good 2-drops, and I'm going to touch on some of them, but they are few and far between and don't feel like you need to have 5, 6, 7 2-drops. Often, I'm good with getting away with like 3 2-drops or 3 things to do before turn 3 in the sealed format. Really a readjustment, I would say, compared to a lot of formats as of late. Next up, removal is critical. So there are some formats where, you know, removal is good. And, you know, you're going to take it, you're going to draft it, it's going to be, you know, you're going to play some amount of clunky removal in your sealed pool sometimes. In this format, removal, if you don't have like 3, 4, 5 hard removal spells, or at least removal spells that can kill most things, you're going to have a pretty rough time. So this is twofold. One, there's a lot of must-answer cards at uncommon and rare. One of the things about Dominaria is you really do notice the difference between the rares and the uncommons and the commons. The commons are fairly low power level. They don't, you know, especially like the threats don't often demand an answer, but because it's sealed, you're going to face more rares on average. You're going to face more uncommons on average. You need to be able to answer these must-answer cards. Also, one of the things that makes this, exacerbates this a little bit is in a lot of formats, you can kind of skirt around bombs. You can play a good curve of 2, 3, 4, have a combat trick, even in sealed sometimes. And that just doesn't happen as often in this format. Again, the cheap cards just aren't that aggressively costed, so you do have a decently tough time aggroing people out, and that just shouldn't be a default plan. You know, maybe this is a good point to touch on this, or a good time to touch on this, but I think most of your sealed pools in this format should just be built as play all your best cards, be a mid-ranger controlling pile. There are some pools that lend themselves to aggressive decks, but I think that's a rarity. I think it doesn't happen very often. If you do have that, you're very lucky, or you're very unlucky that you have to play an aggressive deck because you didn't open up the good cards that are the good late game cards, right? So back to removal. It's just really important that you've got, you know, like I said, 3 or 4 catch-all removal spells to answer the important cards. And it's also important that you save your removal spells, right? Like, don't kill that 3 mana 3/2 that's pecking you in for a few points. Like, if you really, really have to, maybe you're mana screwed, yeah, do it. But find some other way to deal with it, right? If you think you can block that 2 turns down the road, plan for that, because you're really going to be regretting when they slam a Demon Lord Belzenlock or something, or like a Lyra Dawnbringer, and you use your removal spell on their stupid 3-drop, right? So even more so than in most formats, in most sealed formats, hold your removal for the important stuff, because the commons generally just don't need an answer. Now, sometimes you have to answer a flyer because, like, you're like, okay, that thing's just going to kill me, and this is why flyers are so good. But I'm going to reiterate it. I already just said it like twice in the past 2 minutes, but I'm going to say it again. Save your removal spells. One of the things, too, is I'm willing to stoop pretty low if I don't have good removal spells. So, you know, I have on this this previous slide here 2 really good removal spells, 2 of the best ones. Vicious Offering, 1 in a black, instant, give something -2, -2. You can sacrifice a creature to kick it, and if it was kicked, you give it -5, -5. Just really efficient, really good, kills the big things. Similar card, Shivan Fire, single red mana instant, kicker for 4. It deals 2 damage to a creature, or if it was kicked, it deals 4 damage. So just, you know, these things are cheap, efficient, kills the cheap stuff if you need to, but also scales up as the game goes on. And then there's like a tier of removal spells that aren't that good, but if I don't have that top tier of removal spells, the good, efficient catch-all stuff, I will put in my deck because it's a necessity. So stuff like Deep Freeze, which is a 2 and a blue enchantment. It's an aura. The enchanted creature has base power and toughness 0/4 and has defender and loses all abilities and is a wall in addition to its other types, which doesn't have too much relevance. Actually, no, it does, because Juggernaut is in this set, and Juggernaut can't be blocked by walls. So that is a little piece of flavor there, I suppose. There's also something like Blood Tallow Candle, which is a single mana for an artifact. 6 tap, sacrifice Blood Tallow Candle. Target creature gets -5, -5 until end of turn. It's not ideal. It's clunky, but it gets the job done. It kills the giant Lyras and the Demon Lord Belzenlocks and the dragons and what have you, you know? So, yeah, I would aim for a minimum of 3 or 4, but I would push towards, you know, 5 or 6 if you have even these kind of medium removal spells. I would play most of them. All right, and another big picture point here. Just like old school Magic, blue is excellent in this set. Blue's just got this roster of commons that's super deep. Also happen to be very good in sealed because they're like card draw and big flyers and counter spells. You know, these cards all generally go up in sealed. So, honestly, a good way to get acquainted with the set, I would say, is just go to 17lands.com, as I often recommend. Sort by color, and you'll see just how many of the blue commons are top performers. Now, there's no sealed data. There's just not a large enough sample size to have that. But the draft data does approximate it well enough, I think. That gives you some context, lets you calibrate yourself with the format. And blue has just got so many of the commons that are just like, yeah, this is, you know, some of the top commons. Calling some stuff out here. Academy Journey Mage, which is 5 mana, 4 in blue for a 3/2. It costs 1 less if you control a wizard, and when it ETBs, you can bounce a creature. Blink of an Eye, 1 in a blue, instant, bounce something, or you can kick it for another 1 in a blue, so 4 mana total. If you kick it, you draw a card. Both of these fantastic cards. I already touched on Cloud Reader Sphinx, the big 3/4 flyer. Syncopate is in this set. X in a blue, instant, counter target spell unless you pay, or unless they pay X. If the spell is countered this way, you exile it. Really, just flexible, efficient removal spell. Exile matters some amount, so your opponent can't buy stuff back from the graveyard. So this isn't something you can control, but hopefully your pool has just a bunch of blue cards. That would be ideal. If I were to wish something for all the listeners out there, I wish that you open 15 good blue commons, basically. Next up, artifact and enchantment removal. So I think artifact and enchantment removal is main deckable in this format. So there's 2 main ones here. I think there might be one other I might be forgetting, but Broken Bond, 1 in a green for a sorcery. Destroy an enchantment or artifact. You can put a land from your hand onto the battlefield and invoke the divine. 1 in a white instant. Destroy target artifact or enchantment. You gain 4 life. So I was mentioning those must answer bombs. A good number of them are enchantments and artifacts, or enough of them that I think if you put one of these in your deck, you're not going to be too sad about it. Sometimes you nab a Helm of the Host or, you know, a really nutty rare, but sometimes you nab just like an enchantment-based removal spell, a Deep Freeze or something. Icy Manipulator is in the set too, so that's uncommon, so that's something you can nab. Imbolus's Clutches, which is like a mind control variant. You're going to want to nab that. So there's just like enough games that involve a important artifact or enchantment that I think you can play a copy, and if you're short on playables, I think you could probably play 2 as well. Okay, next up, fixing is sparse, but it's really important. So this is a really strange set that, I mean, again, it's kind of like old school Magic where there's, you know, fixing is not as abundant as it is today. There's no dual lands at common or anything like that. And I say it's important because you're going to have pools a lot of the time where you've got a good red bomb and a good blue bomb and a good green card, and you're going to need to shove all the power into your deck as you can because you're just not going to have playables in 2 colors a lot of the time. So fixing is an important part of decks in this format. It's great if you can open some. But again, there's just not a lot of it. So the best fixing in the set is Skittering Surveyor. This is a 3-mana artifact common. It's a 1/2. When it enters the battlefield, you search your library for a basic land, you reveal it, you put it into your hand, shuffle your library. So a 3-mana 1/2 that draws you a land of any color. Just really, really nice way to fix your mana. Helps you hit your land drops, smooths you out. There's also a cycle of rares. We've got Hinterland Harbor and Isolated Chapel. So the check lands, these are the dual lands that come in untapped if you control. For example, Hinterland Harbor is the blue-green one. If you control a forest or an island, it comes in untapped. Those are rares, and, it's not great if these fill up your land slots, or your rare slots, sorry. But, you get what you get, and this is a place where you can get some fixing. Another one that is not amazing, but does get the job done, is Grow from the Ashes. So this is 2 and a green for a sorcery. Search your library for a basic land, put it onto the battlefield, and then shuffle your library. Notably, untapped. It doesn't come in tapped. And if this spell was kicked, you instead search for 2 basic lands, put them on the battlefield, shuffle your library. The kicker is 2. So it's 5 mana overall if you kick it to get 2 basic lands. Again, those come in untapped, so it's not as big of a cost sometimes as it might seem. This is a card that, again, it's not the best fixing. It's a little bit clunky, but it's a necessity a lot of the time. And also, this helps with double pip splashing. So you can cast a Varric's Bladewing or a big mythic dragon, whatever it is. Or you can splash that in your blue-green deck. And it's just totally fine if you have enough of these, or enough Skittering Surveyors, or enough ways to have double costed cards in your deck. I would ideally want like 8 sources for a double pip splash. So if you have a Varric's Bladewing, which is just like a big mythic dragon, which is a 2 red card, you're going to want to have 8 sources in your deck somehow. So like 2 mountains, a Skittering Surveyor, 2 Grow from the Ashes. That's like a little bit cheaty because you're kind of counting multiples there, but something like that to be able to play your awesome bomb. And I would stretch my mana a little bit more often in this format just to get that power in. A kind of contentious card is Navigator's Compass. Well, it's not contentious. I think most people know it's not good, but I do want to discuss some corner cases here. So this is a single mana artifact, and it says when it enters the battlefield, you gain 3 life, and you can tap it until end of turn. Target land you control becomes the basic land type of your choice in addition to its other type. So it's kind of like a Pixie Illusionist from Dominaria United, where it changes one of your lands to something else for the turn. So this is a pretty bad card because it doesn't draw you a card. You're just like straight up down a card for fixing your mana. And this card fixes your mana pretty well. Like it does the job you want, but at the cost of a whole card, right? It's just really, really painful. So I would recommend playing this card if, and only if, 1, you don't have better fixing and you have bombs to splash. 2, well, you have good enough cards that you're putting this card in your deck and it's worth actually, going down a card to cast your awesome mythic card. Or 3, you need all 3 of these. You've got card draw. So you've got divinations, you've got dark bargains. So you can make up for the card advantage loss here. It's not that big of a deal to play this card if you've got an awesome card that you're splashing and you're going to draw an additional 7-8 cards over the course of the game or something like that. So it's a lot of things that need to come together, a big confluence, but it's not strictly unplayable. I just want to warn that it's generally unplayable. Sam Black had a, famously drafted like a 5-color Legends deck at the Pro Tour, where this format was the draft format, and it was really, really cool. You can search it up on YouTube. Just search like Sam Black, Navigator Compass, Pro Tour or something. Really awesome deck. If you want to see the master at work, the 5-color master at work, you can check that out, see what his deck looked like. And it was kind of exactly what I just talked about. He had good reasons to play 5 colors and some card advantage. Had all those pieces going for him. All right, let's get into some mechanics here. So Dominaria is pretty light on mechanics, luckily. So let's get into them. Sagas. Most people know Sagas, and this is the first place where they debuted. They're straightforward in this set. There's no twist. There's no read ahead. There's no flipping. It's just Chapter 1, Chapter 2, Chapter 3. And most of them are pretty good. I think there's about 14 or 15 Sagas in this set. And my advice for you, aside from just looking on 17 lands and see how they perform, would just be if it reads well to you, it's probably pretty good. And if it reads poorly to you, which I think there's actually a clear distinction between the ones that are just like, okay, this like generates some tokens and puts counters on my things, like that looks good, and ones that are like, oh, this blows up all the lands and then slowly brings them back. Like that's kind of weird. If it looks weird, it's probably bad. If it looks good, it's probably good. There might be 1 or 2 that are a bit tricky to evaluate, but it's pretty straightforward for the most part. The one I do want to call out that I think is a bit of a trap based on how much I see it in play, or when there was flashbacks, and even at the time back in the day, is Chainer's Torment. So this is 3 and a black. First 2 chapters are Chainer's Torment deals 2 damage to each opponent. You gain 2 life. So okay, so you drain them for 4 over the course of 2 turns. The third chapter is create an XX black nightmare horror creature token, where X is half your life total rounded up, and then it deals X damage to you. So it's kind of appealing. It's kind of got a little bit of, Vampire Spawn, Okiba Record Raid sort of vibe, but it's expensive, and that third chapter is just brutal. Like, you lose half your life, so you've basically negated the drain, right? You go from like 16 to 8. That's really brutal. And you get an 8/8 in play, but your opponent kills it, your opponent bounces it. It's just a nightmare. It's not worth, the juice is not worth the squeeze here. Avoid this one. You're going to lose a lot more games casting this card than you will win games. All right, another mechanic here, Kicker. So Kicker is back, quote unquote. I want to say back. Well, the back is accurate because Kicker existed many times before this set. But just like in Dominaria United, we have Kicker. It exists in a little bit of a different form in this set. So in Dominaria United, the Kicker twist is off-color Kicker, right? We have red cards with blue activation, or blue Kicker costs, and green cards with red Kicker costs. Here, the shtick is just classic Kicker, where your Kicker cards are all just very expensive when you kick them. So, for example, we've got Krosan Druid, 2 and a green for a 2/3. It has Kicker of 5 mana, and when you kick the Druid, you gain 10 life. So, 8 mana, 2/3, gain 10 life. Not a bad card. Sapperling Migration is one of the better ones here. 1 and a black for a sorcery. Kicker, 4 mana, so 2 to play normally, or 6 to kick. Create 2 1/1 green Sapperling creature tokens. If the spell was kicked, you make 4 instead. So, not a bad card, just a good token generator. There is a Sapperling sub-theme in this set. Black-green cards care about Sapperling, so a good quality card. Caligo Skinwitch is another one. 1 and a black, 1/3, Kicker, 3 and a black. When it enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, each opponent discards 2 cards. The advice I would give for almost all the Kicker cards, just like almost across the board, is try to kick them rather than play them out. Because most of the front sides, like the non-kicked versions of these cards, are quite bad. Like, Krosan Druid is just a 2/3. Caligo Skinwitch is just a 1/3. Sapperling Vibration just makes 2 1/1 Sapperlings, which isn't too bad, because there is ways to use the Sapperlings, but you would really like to kick them, and in most games, you will have time to kick them. That's the key. I think too often I see people just running out their Skinwitch on turn 2, and it's just like, all right, you got a 1/3. The game's gonna go on for 10 more turns. Like, enjoy that 1/3, So, unless your opponent is pressuring you, you just feel like you really have to get on board, don't play the Kicker cards before you can kick them, I would say. If I'm to give some rough numbers, I would say you kick them like 80% of the time. Like, you really want to kick them, but sometimes you do have to play them that 20% of the time when, your opponent plays a 2 mana 3/1. Well, of course, you're going to play your Sapperling Migration on 2, so you don't take 6-9 damage over the course of a few turns, and you don't have to use a removal spell on that stupid little 3/1. You can save it for a bomb of some sort. The last mechanic here is Historic, which is not exactly a mechanic. It's more of a batching term, kind of like modified in Neon Dynasty, that cared about auras and enchantments, auras and equipments and counters. So it's just like, if this is, modified creatures count as these collection of things. Historic cards are artifacts, legendary creatures, and sagas. Those are all historic cards. And you'll have cards that care about when you cast a historic card. So for example, we've got Dominant Trapper, which is 2 and a white for a 3/2. When you cast a historic spell, tap target creature and opponent controls. So, fine, okay, curve filler card. Wrath Capuchin is one of the better ones. 2 white blue for a 3/3 flying flash. You can cast your historic spells as though they had flash. The secret here, the tip, is that most historic cards are just very bad. It's gonna come up, and it's, I'm mentioning it here because, for posterity's sake, basically. But most historic cards just aren't good. Like, they're just bad cards. You've got like 1 mana 1/1 in blue. Then when you cast a historic spell, you scry 1, which maybe doesn't sound like the worst card in the world, but again, when the games go on for a really long time, 1 mana 1/1 is just really low impact, and the scry is, it's fine, but it's just not that good. You don't want to be putting a 1 mana 1/1 flyer in your deck in this format. I've got the 2 cards I mentioned, Wrath Capuchin and Dominant Trapper. They don't seem amazing, but they're some of the better ones, honestly. Like, when I went through the list of cards, I picked out some of the better ones. I think there's like 15 historic cards in the set, and yeah, slim pickings. So don't worry about this too much. I guess a shortcut is, if you look and see a historic card says, I care about historic, and you're wondering how good the card is, bet, chances are that it's just not a card you really have to care about. A lot of them are like filler cards. You could play them, but really don't try to don't put bad artifacts or stuff in your deck to enable these cards. It's not that kind of stuff that's going on here. Okay, let's jump into some colors. So this is more for folks that haven't played the set before, but it's also for folks that maybe have played it and need a little bit of a refresher. Blue is where we're starting. Again, I mentioned a lot of the bangers in blue, and blue's got a lot of them. Academy Journey Mage, which is the Manowar Wizard, Blink of an Eye, Syncopate, Cloud Reader Sphinx. Opt is one that I should call out here. So Opt, I'm sure many people know, single blue mana, instant, scry one, draw a card. This card is notably good in this format, well, for a few reasons. One, there's a slight instant and sorceries matters theme in blue and red. There's like a wizard spell theme that, it's a cheap cantripping spell. But the more important thing is that it helps you find your good cards. And again, this is something I'm going to hammer on. Cards that help you find your good cards in this format are really important because you're just not going to have a deck full of awesome cards. And if you can draw more of your good cards than your opponent, you're going to win a lot of games. So Opt is a card that I'm going to play, 2 or 3 copies of if I have in my pool. You can replace a land with if you've got 2 or 3 Opts, because a bunch of cheap cantripping spells do mean that, you're going to find your lands more often. You can just go lower on the land count, because if you have a 2-land hand, well, you can opt for a land, and then the late game, instead of drawing a land, you're drawing an Opt. So a good card. I would play, quite a few copies if you do have them. Again, this is like a good filler card in your deck, not a bad filler card. And the more good filler cards you can have over bad filler cards, the happier you're going to be. A few more blue cards here. Academy Drake, 3 mana for a 2/2 flyer. If you kick it for 4 mana, so 7 mana altogether, you can put 2 counters on it. So 7 mana 4/4 flyer, baby. Like that counts as a good card in this set. That's a card you're going to want. You're really going to be happy with this as one of your filler cards in your deck. Valdelian Arcanist, which is 1 in a blue for a 1/3. Tap it, add colorless mana, spend the mana only to cast instants and sorceries. We've had a lot of cards like this in the past few years that haven't been good. We have Volsh Tideturner in Dominaria, and this is actually a fine version of this card in this set. Like, it's actually worse than a lot of the versions we have. It's just strictly worse. But in the context of the set, where you are casting expensive kicker cards, and you're casting your divinations and stuff, holding up your syncopates, it's a fine card. It plays well with the blue cards. And then Deep Freeze, like I mentioned, that clunky aura-based removal spell that turns something into an 0/4 defender. Yeah, totally a fine card. 2 last blue cards I want to shout out here that they kind of go hand in hand. They're kind of a combo. Cold Water Snapper. It's a 6 mana, 5 in a blue, 4/5 hexproof. So it's a big boy. And that's not an amazing card on its own. It's a playable, again, the kind of okay filler. But if you combo it with Arcane Flight, which is a single blue mana aura, enchanted creature gets +1/+1 and has flying, the game's going to end pretty soon after that. And your opponent's just not going to be able to deal with a 5/6 flyer hexproof very often. They need a board wipe, or they need a bunch of flying blockers. I was saying that it's really important to know how you're going to win in the format. And if you don't have a lot of good top end, a combo like this can get the job done, especially when you are playing blue. You're seeing a lot of your cards. You can assemble this combo. It's not like you have to wait around forever to draw it. So this is a real thing that you should be on the lookout for if you don't have other powerful stuff to do on the top end. Also, Arcane Flight is not the best thing you can put on it. We've got On Sarah's Wings, which is a 3 and a white uncommon. Enchanted creature is legendary, and it gets +1/+1, has flying, vigilance, and lifelink. So, if that wasn't enough, if the flying wasn't enough, giving it vigilance and lifelink, there's no way that your opponent comes back from this. Like, if you land a On Sarah's Wings on a snapper, the game ends almost immediately, because you're gaining 5 life a turn, flying, evasive, and your opponent can't attack you back. So that's just like a game-winning combo to look out for. Next up, white. So white is, I believe, the second best color in the set. It is a little bit worse in sealed than it would be in draft, just because some of the better white cards do lean aggressively, and if you don't have the shell for an aggressive deck, then, they get a little bit worse. But I do think white has some quality cards. So Mesa Unicorn, one of the better ones, just 2 mana, 2/2 lifelinker. It's as simple as that, but it's a classically good card. We know this card should be good at this point. This style of card, we're happy with 2 mana lifelink, and there's a decent number of ways to pump this card, where it's like a 3/3, or you put some equipment on it. It can be even more of a threat. So solid card, solid plus, I would even say. Call of the Cavalry. This is a really good one. So this is 3 and a white for a sorcery. Put 2 white knight creature tokens on the battlefield with vigilance. So for 4 mana, you get 2/2 vigilance tokens that, again, all the same stuff I just talked about with the unicorn can be pumped. You can equip it. They hold the ground. They've got vigilance, which is just like really nice. If you've got a bunch of these, it's really hard for your opponent to punch through on the ground, and you can attack into them with impunity for the most part, because if you've got vigilance, you're not worried about the crackback. So really solid card. Again, it goes in the solid plus category. Even above that, I would say. I would say it's like actively a good card. Pulls me into white. And then Blessed Light, just solid removal spell. 4 and a white instant. Exile target creature or enchantment. It's kind of funny I'm saying, yeah, 5 mana, kill a thing is solid. But that's just what the set is. You're pretty happy with this, even if it costs 5. A few more cards in white here. Pegasus Courser. I called out this one before. 3 mana, 1/3. Flying. When it attacks, another target creature gains flying until end of turn. So, just helps you peck in. Also jumps maybe a lifelinker, maybe just like a high power creature. Just solid card. Gideon's Reproach. 1 and a white for an instant. It deals 4 damage to an attacking or blocking creature. And Adamant Will. So 1 and a white instant. Target creature gets +2/+2 and gains indestructible until end of turn. So I will note that the combat tricks in this set are mostly not good. You generally shouldn't play them, I would say. But Adamant Will is the exception because it's just efficient. Just, 2 mana, +2/+2, indestructible, wins most combats. And of course, it doubles as a protection spell. So many of the games come down to who can stick their bomb, who has the giant flyer stick, and, your opponent can't remove it. Adamant Will helps you in that situation, because if the game's gone on a little bit longer, maybe you think your opponent has some removal spells in hand, they've been holding some cards, play your thing, hold up Adamant Will. It's a really big blowout when they go for the removal spell, and your bomb survives. So another card that's just, I'm happy to have this in my deck. Black is another really deep color. So black, I don't think has the high highs as blue, let's say, but I do think it is close to as deep as blue. And maybe it's even the second best color over white. All three of these colors, blue, white, and black, I think are fairly close, with blue as the clear front runner, and white and black are, I think, just a little bit below. So Vicious Offering, another one I mentioned before, 2 mana, 1 in the black, target creature gets -2, -2, and if you've kicked it, it gets -5, -5. It's an instant. The kicker is sack a creature. Fungal Infection. This one's the one that looks a little bit, it's a little bit of a sleeper, I would say. It's a single black mana for an instant. Target creature gets -1, -1 until end of turn, and then you create a 1/1 green Saproling creature token. So this has a lot more applications than you might think, or is better in more situations than you might think. There's a decent number of 1 toughness creatures that you just go, all right, kill that thing. I get a 1/1 for 1 mana. That's a really good deal. Or, they attack on turn 2 with their 2/2. You go, all right, give you -1, -1. I make a 1/1. I block it. So this just eats 2/2s if you wanted to. It can win a combat. Your opponent attacks with their 4/4. You line up a block with your 4/4. You win a combat, get a 1/1. So just the efficiency of this is really quite good. And then Eviscerate, catch-all removal spell. 4 mana, 3 and a black, sorcery, destroy target creature. No bonuses, no nothing. It's a sorcery. Just plain and simple. But like I said, you do need these catch-all removal spells in your deck. A few more cards here. Deathbloom Thallid, 2 and a black, 3/2. When it dies, you make a 1/1 green Saproling creature token. Just really nice card. Good in the Saproling decks. Good for sacrifice stuff. And Windgrace's Acolyte. So this is a 5 mana, 4 and a black, 3/2 flyer. When it enters the battlefield, you mill 3 cards and you gain 3 life. Again, all the things that checks a lot of boxes here. Evasive. A little bit of incidental life gain, fills up your graveyard for graveyard synergies that exist with Soul Salvage. You can mill some stuff, buy some stuff back. You do have to worry a little bit about this card sometimes because just like Soul Tender, what's Eerie Soul Tender in Dominaria United, there's sometimes you just like, you draw it on turn 20 and you've got 10 cards in your library and you're like, can I afford to cast this card? That does happen a good amount in this format. This format comes down to natural decking a lot of the time, or maybe not a lot. A lot is overselling it, but more often than in any format I can remember in the past little while. So there is some times where you're like, all right, I play my Acolyte, and then they blink of an eye, they bounce it, and you're like, okay, I'll play it again, and then they bounce it again with an Academy Journey Mage, and you're like, all right, I guess I mill 10 cards, and sometimes your opponent can turn that into a win condition, or you can turn that into a win condition if your opponent has some self-mill stuff. So you do have to be aware of that, but the card is quite solid. A few more cards. Soul Salvage, Dark Bargain, Caligo Skin Witch. I mentioned these. Just kind of fill the card advantage role. So black and blue do a really good job of filling that card advantage role. And they also have good interaction as well. So I guess, even talking through this a little bit, I would probably put black and blue as the best commons, the best colors, the ones you hope to open the most commons of in your sealed pool. Just because they do fill a lot of the roles that you're really looking to fill. The card advantage, the good creatures, and the removal spells. Red. Red is a bit of a problem child here. It's So there's not a lot of great, generically good red cards. It's a really good color in draft because there's like a mono red aggro deck you can draft that uses like D2 Lava Runner and Run Amok that, can be quite effective. But that's just not going to be what most of your sealed pools look like. So you're really looking for cherry picking good cards that are supporting your other colors. And there's just not a lot of them. So Shiv and Fire, the 1 mana deal 2 that you can kick to deal 4, that's a good card. You're really happy to play that. G2 Chronicler is another one. 1 in a red for a 1/3. Kick it for 4 mana when ETBs. If it was kicked, you can return a spell from your graveyard to your hand. So just solid value card, kind of like Caligo Skinwitch a little bit. It's a 2 mana 1/3 that you can kick later for some value. So these are good cards. I would be happy having these as support cards in like a red-blue deck or something. But past that, it does get pretty rough. There is that package I mentioned of G2 Lava Runner, which is a 1 mana 1/2 that if there are 2 or more instants or sorceries in your grave, it gets +1/+0 in haste. So it's like a 1 mana 2/2 haster in a spells heavy deck. Run Amok, 1 red instant, target attacking creature gets +3/+3 and gains trample until end of current turn. Really aggressive, good combat trick. G2 Journey Mage, 2 red for a 3/2. When it enters the battlefield, if you have another wizard, the Journey Mage deals 2 damage to each opponent. So look out for your pools that do have this package, like a good red aggro package. Again, I will just caution that it's not going to happen very often, and a big trap you can fall into in this format, but in most sealed formats, is trying to build a aggro deck that just isn't there, that you just don't have the support for, that you just don't have the early good creatures for, you don't have the closing potential. If you don't open a lot of bombs, I would try not to just be like, well, I'll draft an aggro deck, because that is the general, I think, what a lot of people go to. Just like, well, can't beat them, go under them. I think instead my general advice for I didn't open bombs, what do I do? Is just play a bunch of expensive stuff. I've said this before on the show when covering sealed, but I do think it is one of the best kind of like emergency mode strategies where, your opponent's going to be choked on interaction, right? And the games are pretty slow. So if you just have a bunch of 6 mana 5/5 Death Touch, which is a card in this set, 3 of those on your top end, your opponent can't answer all of them, right? So maybe your curve is a little bit wonky. Maybe you've got, some parts, you've got the card draw and the removal, but you're lacking the finishers. Just play a bunch of big stuff, like 4, 5, 6, 7 giant things. The game, you're not going to get run over very often, especially in this format. It's better than a half-assed aggro plan because you are just going to get brick-walled so often in this format if you don't have a really good aggro deck. So just word of caution there. Green. Green is also a little bit troubled. So it's got Saproling Migration, which I mentioned is the token maker, the 2 mana token maker that you can kick to make 4 tokens. It's got Yavimaya Sap Herd, which is 2 and a green for a 2/2. That when it enters the battlefield, make a 1/1 Saproling, just a good card. And then it's got Llanowar Elves, which is a 1 mana 1/1 tap out of green. It's like a classic card. Llanowar Elves is an interesting one because, I was talking earlier about how you really want to limit the number of bad top decks, and Llanowar Elf is a pretty bad top deck. So, if you want another mana source in your deck, you're really top heavy, yeah, it's a fine card in your deck. But if you're a middle of the curve kind of deck where you don't have a bunch of 5s and 6s, maybe you not a lot of kicker cards, I wouldn't really consider playing this card very often. It's a fine card if you need to, but it's definitely not as good as it is in Constructed, where you're just always going 2 into busted 3 drop or busted 4 drop. Those curve outs, there's potential for that, but it's not going to happen that often. So a little bit too often, you're going to find yourself being like, all right, I drew Llanowar Elf from turn 7, and yeah, it's awesome if you can have that explosive start of Elf into Sapherd into 4/4, but that's just not going to be your average game most of the time. And unless you have a way to sacrifice an Elf or just a mana producing creature to, something that gets pumped when you sack it, or that draws cards when you sack a creature, I would shy away from this card more often than not. Okay, so one thing I want to shout out here, card specific, before we get into some brief sealed tips just to lead us out here, is I want to touch on this cycle of legendary sorceries. So this is a sorcery cycle where it's at rare, and what they say is you can only cast this card if you have a legendary creature or planeswalker. You just straight up cannot cast the card if you do not control a legend. And every pack of this format has a legend in it, just like Dominaria United. So you're going to end up with 6 legends. But to comfortably play one of these cards, you need to have, I would say, 3 legends at a minimum. 4 is comfortable. And if you don't have those, they're going to be stuck in your hand a little bit too often. So I would consider these a trap a little bit. I think that often, like when I've done deck techs of this format, people will play this with like 2 legends in their deck, and it's just a bit risky to do that. You're gonna have these cards be blank cards a little bit too often. I will also note that not all of them are good. The green one, Kamal's Druidic Vow, which cares about, you need a legend to cast it, and I'm not gonna read the full card, but basically, like, you need a legend to cast it, and then it cares about the number of legends in your deck. Like, it looks at the top cards of your library and puts more legends into play. You're just not gonna have enough legends for that card to be good. The red one, Dryas Immolating Inferno, which just like deals a bunch of damage, is quite good. Karn's Temporal Sundering, which is a time walk, is quite good. Yawgmoth's Vile Offering, which is a kill spell plus a reanimate spell, quite good. Urza's Ruinous Blast is the white one. It says exile all non-land permanents that aren't legendary. That one's a little bit tricky, can be good. You can set it up where your opponent doesn't have any legends. You spot remove their legends, then you cast this, and you're just like left with your one legend. It's a little bit finicky though. It's not as good as the red, blue, and black ones, but it is more playable than the Druidic Vow for sure. So just, again, word of caution on this cycle of cards here. Okay, and just to close this out here, let's talk some sealed specifics. So, I will say, again, splash liberally. Splash your double-costed cards, your Imbolus's Clutches, which is that Mind Control, 6-mana Mind Control. Splash your Varix Blade Wings. Do it with the tools that you have in hand. I'm not just saying throw in, 4 or 5 mountains into your deck to splash your double-costed card. But power and powerful cards and making sure you have powerful cards in your deck is more important than a perfect mana base in this format. Especially because this is a format where you don't get punished as hard for stumbling a little bit. In some formats, the risk of a tough splash is you just don't have your colors early, you miss your 2-drop, your opponent runs you over, and you're like, well, yeah, my mana base killed me here. In this format, you've got some time, you've got card draw to find your sources, so I would push towards playing those powerful cards rather than being conservative. Again, you still need to make sure you're accounting for the number of sources in your deck. You want to make sure you are responsible in some regards, but I will take some liberties that I would in this format that I wouldn't in others. Of course, if you have just good single pips cards that you're happy to splash, good gold cards, or something like Fight with Fire, which is one of the mythic uncommons, 3 mana, 2 in a red, deals 5 to any creature, or you can kick it. Well, it is kind of a double-costed card, which is kind of tricky because you have to kick it for 5 in a red. So in total, it's 9 mana to kick in total, 7 red. If you kick it, it deals 10 damage divided as you choose among any number of targets. The card is just good enough that it's going to end the game so much of the time. And of course, the nice thing is this card, you can't just, it's an easy splash if you just need to cast it early to kill a creature. And so adjust your willingness to splash, I guess, is the big picture thing here, because I know I will talk endlessly about the importance of a good mana base in your draft and your sealed decks. Be a little bit more willing to bend the rules here, and I will not fault you for it. Avoid low impact cards at all costs. Again, I really want to stress that you don't need to make your 2-drop slot look perfect. Ask yourself, 1, do I have 3 or 4 things to do that are impactful before turn 3? And if that's true, you don't need to resort to bad cards. You don't need to resort to, for example, Llanowar Scout, 1 and a green for a 1/3. Tap, put a land from your hand onto the battlefield. Card's okay in your opening hand, but again, it's really, really bad later. So make sure that when you're trying to figure out, if you're maybe not as acquainted with this format, just ask yourself, am I happy to draw this on turn 7? And if you're not, consider it a low impact card, I would say. And last point I want to point out here is watch out for the good aggro pools. I mentioned this a little bit, but there are going to be some good aggro pools. And as much as I cautioned against them, that is mostly because I think people overcorrect on, I should play this aggro deck in the sealed pool, rather than they aren't looking for the aggro deck often enough, right? I think I'm trying to warn against the more common fail case, basically. And that's not to say that these decks don't exist. Good white-based aggro decks can exist. Good red-based aggro decks can exist. They are going to be uncommon and you need to be careful. So if you're looking for, does my deck have this? I'm probably looking for a confluence of a lot of things. 7 things to do before turn 3. You've got to have 6 2-drops at a minimum. And again, this is what's tricky about it, because they have to be good 2-drops. Not all the 2-drops in the set are good. You've got to have good combat tricks like Run Amok, good interaction, and ideally, like in any pool, a bomb. So don't count it out, just discount it for building an aggro deck in your Dominaria sealed pool. And that's it. That's all I gotta say about this sealed format. I wish you the best of luck, everybody out there who is planning to participate. I'm gonna send it quickly to Twitch chat for any questions that you might have about specific cards or stuff that I talked about that you may want some clarification on. So Twitch chat, if you want to send it to me, I'm happy to answer. All right, first question. Would you rather run off-color basics to enable a greedy splash or run a very bad on-color card? The greedy splash. So often my mana bases in this format when I'm greedily splashing. Okay, so when I'm single pip splashing, like I've just got a card that is 4 and a black, the Eldest Reborn might be a good example, good uncommon. If I don't have any fixing in my pool, and I have done this, my mana base is just like 3 swamps, and I'm playing 18 lands to make sure I've got like 7 and 8 of my other sources, which is cutting it close, right? You don't, like, 7 for a main color is low, but I'm willing to make that concession to make sure I'm not playing a bad card, and to make sure I'm putting a good card in my deck. So you probably can't cast the double pipped cards like Embolus's Clutches or Demon Lord Belzenlock with that mana base, but certainly you can splash a single pipped card off of basics in this set. I have done it before, and I imagine I'm going to do it at some point this weekend if I do get to all 3 of my, I get to play all 3 sealed pools. How many different colors would you be okay with splashing, or is that required to be heavy one color? So I would say that 5 to 4 color decks can happen, but they're not common. The most common splash is going to be a single color. Like, you're going to be 2 colors and a splash. Maybe it's a bit of a heavy splash. You've got 3 black cards in your blue-red deck or something like that. But the fixing exists in a way that it's much easier to splash 1 color than 2, because a lot of the fixing searches out a land. So you've got Skittering Surveyor, which is that artifact creature that goes and gets a land. That searches out a land from your deck, so you need to put, for example, if you're splashing a black card, a swamp in your deck. Grow from the Ashes is another one that searches out a land from your deck. And it's much less intrusive on your mana base if you've got 1 or 2 off-color basics of the same color, rather than like 2 mountains, 2 swamps. That's a little bit tough in your your white-green deck or something. Like, if you're white-green, it's hard to splash 2, like a red card and a black card. It can happen if you've got multiple Grow from the Ashes, Skittering Surveyors, if you're in that spot where Navigator's Compass is a playable card in your deck, or if you do have the rare dual lands. But again, it's just not going to be the norm. I would suggest, and I think often you can get to good playables by just 2 colors and 1 splash. And when I say 1 splash, I mean of 1 color. It's okay to splash multiple cards of that color within the 1 to 3 card range. If you have Adamant Will, which is the white protection spell to protect a bomb, how likely are you to wait 2 turns on casting it if you can do so? So you can hold it up in the same turn. So a lot of that kind of stuff is going to depend on the state of the game. Sometimes you just have to jam because you're going to fall too far behind if you don't play your thing on curve. But I would suggest waiting if you can. And I think you're going to want to do that most often. Or, sorry, not that you're going to want to do it most often. I think you'll be able to do that most often because, again, it's not that easy for your opponents to pressure you. Now, there are some times where you're like, well, I don't have the lands in hand to be able to play my 5-mana bomb and hold up my Adamant Will 2 turns later, and you're like, all right, well, I don't know what I'm going to be drawing. Maybe I should just jam it. That's more reasonable at that point. But if the game is at all, if you don't feel like you're under pressure, the game's not slipping away from you, if you've got other stuff to play, I wouldn't just jam the bomb on turn 5 and hope it sticks. Because at least if people are building their sealed pools right, they're going to be playing all the removal they can, the clunky stuff even, that deals with the bombs, and they're going to be splashing it, so people are going to have access to 4 or 5 removal spells, and I would at least like to, get a hit in with my Lyra Dawnbringer, or a hit in with my Giant Flyer, before maybe they have to use their second removal spell. So it's kind of like a 80-20, I would say, maybe 70-30 of, 80% or 70% hold it, 30%, 20%, you have to just play it out. But most of the time, I find you're not super pressured into playing it, especially in sealed. How playable was the equipment like Jousting Lance? It was good. I don't remember. So Jousting Lance is if memory serves, 2-mana equipment that equips for 3, and the equipped creature gets +2 and gains first strike if it's attacking. I think that card is okay. I don't think it's a particularly awesome card. I think it's good if you've got a lot of tokens that you want to leverage somehow, like you've got Sapperling tokens or Soldier tokens, or you're like short on ways to break through a board stall. Like that's what that card does the best, right? It breaks through a board stall. It's not just generically good. I play some stuff, I play my lance, I attack. I think it's more, it fills the role of, I don't have a lot of awesome finishers. I don't have a lot of flyers, but I do have Jousting Lance. It can turn all of my small creatures into a threat. And this kind of ties back to what I was saying about you really do need to know how you're winning the game in this format and answer the question, what is my deck doing to push through a board stall? And that might be your answer, is just a Jousting Lance. And I think most of the other equipment isn't good. There's rare equipment that is good, like Helm of the Host, and there's like a Blade of the Forebearers, I believe it's called. Those are quite good, but I think they read obviously good. I think most of the other common and uncommon equipment just sucks. So yeah, Jousting Lance is a plan if you don't have other good ways to win the game. How good is Time of Ice in a slow deck in Sealed? Okay, so this is a saga. The first 2 chapters are, it's a 4-mana saga, 3 in a blue. First 2 chapters are tap a creature, it doesn't untap, as long as Time of Ice is on the battlefield. And the last chapter is return all tapped creatures to their owner's hand. Card's very good. I think even if you're a slower deck, the card is good. Like, even in a slower deck, a tempo play or just something that, like, gets something off the board is important because that's mana your opponent needs to spend. So it's not like a bounce spell where it's just like, okay, unsummon, bounce your thing. They just go, okay, I replay it next turn. It's not a big deal. But Time of Ice is a combination of, well, you lock down 2 things, and that takes them out of combat, and that can enable good attacks, and then they have to replay those cards, and even though the format is slow, you still want to be spending your mana efficiently as the game goes on, or spending as much as you can. And if your opponent's stuck spending their, casting their 4-drop again, they're not casting a card draw spell, they're not casting a removal spell. So yeah, I think even in a slower deck, Time of Ice is quite good. Yeah, one last thing I will say that I, flirted with a little bit is, as much as I'm hoping to give you some context for this set, chat, I think if you are brand new to it, or honestly, not even if you're brand new, especially if you want a refresher, because I think if you have drafted this set before, you can have your original evaluations, maybe, a lot of times our original evaluations of cards are not accurate. And I think that has shown as we've gotten flashback sets on Arena where 17 lands has shown like this card or this deck is way worse or way better than we expected as a community before we didn't have data. So what I would say is even if you are have drafted the set before or if you're new to it, check out 17 lands for just a good calibration, right? It's not going to be, as always, 17 lands is not a guide to the format, but it does help calibrate you to, oh, this card is good. This card doesn't look so good, but it's pretty good. Or, oh, maybe this card is kind of good, but you look and you're like, okay, no, it's just crap. So I will say if you are serious about doing well and you want to efficiently build your sealed pools, take a trip over to 17 lands. I think we'll use some good. Next question is, did I talk about Divest? So Divest is a single black mana sorcery that you look at your opponent's hand, you take a artifact or a creature, and they discard it. So this is a card that it's kind of on the lower end of filler, and I think the really lower end of filler, where it's not too bad because in some formats, cards like that, like look at your opponent's hand, take a thing, just doesn't matter that much because, okay, you take their best card, but it might not be that much better than their next best card. In Dominaria, their best card is often going to be a lot better than their next best card. So taking the best card out of their hand really does do something. I still wouldn't really love main decking it, but I think it's an okay sideboard card, especially if they have like an artifact that you can't otherwise deal with. You have to take it, like they have a Helm of the Host, a good equipment or something, or there's like a creature bomb that's out of the range of your removal spells. Like all your removal, is damage based and you can only deal 5 or something, and they have like a 5/6 flyer. So yeah, I think it's a passable main deck card if you need it, and a good sideboard card if it fills the role of deals with a threat I can't otherwise deal with. And of course, the small tip I will give for card disruption or hand disruption cards is you always want to wait, or you generally want to wait until the last moment to cast them. Like if you have a card in mind that you're worried about them having, cast it the turn before they would play it. So if it's a 6-mana card, play it on turn 5, so that you give yourself the most chances for them to be able to draw it, and then you can take it from their hand. All right, I'm going to pack up. Once again, if you enjoyed the show, check out patreon.com/limitedlevelups if you thought you learned something. And good luck to everybody planning to play in this Dominaria sealed event next week. And I know this is not going to be something that everybody's going to play in, but I thought, there's probably not going to be a ton of content on this, and it does deserve a refresher. And I did also think it was kind of cool that 2 weeks in a row, I got to cover formats that I played a lot, but I was not a content creator during that time. So I can't say this wasn't a little bit self-motivated as well. So yeah, thank you all for listening and watching out there, and we'll see you next time on the next episode of Limited Level Ups. See you, everybody.